Welcome back to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Temte. On the Balancing Act, we talk to business leaders and industry experts to explore the balancing acts we play in our professional lives and learn about the events that put rocket boosters behind their career success. Today, we have Dr. Alise Cortez joining us. Alise is the Chief Ignition Officer of Gusto Now in Dallas, Texas, your partner in human and organizational transformation. She is also the author of The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And also, she's the author of Purpose Ignited. So, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, defining personal and organizational purpose. Welcome to the show, Alise.
Thanks for having me, Andy. It's great to be on the other side of the mic.
Yes, it is sometimes, isn't it? Alise, before we get started, I ask all of my guests this question. Please tell us the short version of your story.
Okay, well, I spent my most of my 20s really in outside sales roles, and just sort of a happenstance sort of way of navigating the planet, if you will. And I had what I would say an early onset midlife crisis in my early 30s, and my choice was to get a PhD, and that was in human development. And I found about that same time, Andy, I found my way into, I was in Seattle, Washington, everything was technology, and so I found my way into selling technology staffing services. And I realized, wow, my product is people. This is where it's at. This is where I belong, people. And from there, there was just this natural organic unfoldment, Andy, of like, after I went through recruiting, and then I moved into employee learning and development, and then I learned about and did employee engagement and improvement of engagement, leadership development, organizational change, all those sort of things. And then in about 2012, I had this overwhelming, compelling itch to go back and revisit my dissertation research on meaning and work and identity. It was this call from within that just wouldn't let me go. And once I did that, Andy, once I found my way back into that meaning space, I found these 15 modes of engagement that really speak to how does a person find meaning in their work and how is their work related to their sense of self or identity. And one of the modes is called living your purpose, all the way down to the very last one, the most awful one you can be in is called existential crisis. So as that work continued to unfold, and I just kept it really is an unfoldment, like a flower sort of blooming, if you will, that I kept expressing more and more of my purpose and who I really wanted to be in the world. And then I found my way into podcasting myself. Voice America asked me to host my own show, which of course is called Working on Purpose. I've been doing that for 9.5 years. And that really also helped me, as I can imagine you can appreciate, because I bring on authors and I read their books cover to cover, I am constantly unfolding further and catalyzing through those messages. That's my research mechanism. That's what's underneath my 4 books. That's what undergirds the programs that I've created. And so today, really helping organizations to just detect their purpose and then thread it through into their culture and develop inspirational leaders. Short version.
Yeah, excellent. So I'm still stuck on midlife crisis and PhD. Those two things don't seldom go together. I'm having a midlife crisis. I'm going to go get a PhD.
Yeah, well, that there were choices. I could have had an affair at work. I could have bought the sports car, really shiny sports car. I could have ran off to India to an ashram. But it just, I was compelled to get a PhD. And I think it was the right choice, healthy choice, expensive choice, but definitely the right choice.
Yes, a very healthy choice. What's one event in your life that was just a key accelerant for your career? If you've already mentioned it, if you can expand on it, or if it's something completely different, can you give us a look inside?
Yeah, I haven't mentioned it yet. Without a doubt, Andy, I would say I made a decision to follow my then boyfriend at age 26, who I knew for a month, to go and move to Madrid, Spain, and then to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. We were there for a total of 2.5 years. And so I'm a little, kind of a hick from the sticks in northeastern Oregon, had not done a whole lot of travel, moved to Spain while I'm 26. I learned French in college, so I had that as a basis. So Spanish wasn't hard for me. We went all over Western Europe in those 6 months we were living in Madrid. And then when we moved to Rio de Janeiro, we went all over South America and I learned Portuguese. Those experiences, Andy, I would say one, the willingness to totally just step out was huge for me. But those experiences totally blew my mind and heart wide open. And I learned that there was this much bigger, vaster world that I was part of and that it embedded in me. And so the reason I call my company Gusto now, Andy, is because Gusto means pretty much the same thing in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. It means, zest and, enlivened effort and perseverance and all the things that I stand to help people and organizations do for themselves. So that experience imprinted a ton on me. And I call myself today, I married a Costa Rican. That's why my name is Cortez. I'm divorced, but I kept the name. And I consider myself a Latina convertida. I'm a converted Latina. So I've totally embraced the culture. I embedded into the work that I do, which is about vibrancy and zest and turning yourself on from the inside out. Those are all things that I learned from my Latino friends.
That's fantastic. One of my dear mentors, Carl Swayzer, always told me, Andy, if you're not moving, you're standing still. Mm-hmm. And just busting out of the normal, of whatever normal you have, and going and seeing something else. I can totally see how that was an accelerant for you, and I recommend that to all of our listeners. And busting out doesn't mean you have to go to Spain or Brazil, but just keep moving. So thank you for sharing that. Let's start with purpose. I am a huge advocate for aligning one's personal purpose with the purpose of the organization that you lend your talents to maximize the likelihood of becoming and staying an engaged contributor in the world of work. So, where should we start? We start with you. What's your personal purpose? And can you give our listeners some insight into your journey of discovery of your personal purpose?
Absolutely. So my purpose is to help awaken people and organizations to their passion and purpose, and then inspire them to make a contribution worthy of their one precious life. And why? How did I find that? Is one, I've been a card-carrying member of The Walking Dead. I know what that is, right? The lights were on, but not really everybody was really home in there. And it was this feeling of, I understood. I had a very nice life. I was married at the time, very nice life. But I was so aware that I was not living to my potential. I was not doing what I could be doing, how I could be serving to the level and height that I knew I was capable of and desperately wanted to. But I didn't know how to get out of that sort of, self-imposed limitation set. And I hated myself for it. I had a plaque on my desk that used to say, "What will you do with your one precious life?" And I used to turn it over because I couldn't look at it. And so that feeling of life is passing me by. And as the years went on, oh my gosh, there's now more years behind me than there are ahead of me. And that urgency, mortality urgency, is tremendous for purpose. It's part of why purpose works so well. So what really helped that process terribly along was, as I mentioned, doing that meaning and work research, getting published, going to India to present the results in India, having the experience people often have in India, I had that experience I was there for 3 weeks. And then starting the radio, the podcast journey really, really helped continue to catalyze and open that journey of purpose expression and being in the world that way. And it continues to evolve and unfold as I further step into my own shine, as I help others do the same. That's the way that I like to describe my purpose and my journey.
That's great. So the timing of this recording session is just really great because I teach at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, which is my undergraduate alma mater. And one of the first assignments they have is to go through my personal planning guidebook. And as early 20-somethings, the upper left box in the A3 that they have to fill out is, why do I exist? What's my personal purpose?
Wow, that's terrific.
Because everything starts with purpose, as both you and I have come to, both of us in a roundabout fashion. But let's assume that you have one of my students or an early career workforce participant sitting right in front of you right now. How do you coach them on the importance of defining their personal purpose, and how should they go about doing this work?
Hmm. Wow, that's a great question. So first I will say this, Andy, when I'm out speaking to audiences, I will ask audiences, one, what are you passionate about? And you'd be surprised how many people don't know the answer to that question.
Yep.
They say they literally have the blank face and they realize they don't know. The same thing with purpose. If I ask a crowd, how many do you think you've discovered your purpose? It's always a minority, like maybe 3% max. And so what I would say is a couple of things. One, I would say purpose is something that really is detected within ourselves. And so we have to be able to be still enough, quiet enough to hear that little insistent voice that's trying to get your attention, to tell you where to put the next foot on the next lily pad of life. And if you're not quiet enough, if you're on the hamster wheel of life, you're probably not going to hear that whisper. Another thing I would say is, pay attention to and just think about what's always compelled you. What have you yearned for, reached for, that just has you by the scruff of the neck and won't let you go? What is that thing? You can also ask people who've known you for a long time, what do I really stand for? And what would happen in the world if I wasn't here? How would I be missed? Those are some of the things that can start to help you understand that. I can go back to when I was in second grade, and even then I knew and I could see, looking back, that I was an encourager, I was an empowerer. Even then I could see that. So those behaviors are really there. But when you think about, I love the whole ikigai sort of notion, and I've had an author on my show, Hector Garcia, talking about ikigai. But that notion of, where does your joy meet the world's pain? What does the world need? So purpose is always about serving other people or other entities, something else beyond yourself. So if you can start thinking about where do I want to help? Who do I want to serve? Those are all questions that I would ask young people. And I will tell you, many adults, they're desperate to try to understand that question of purpose.
Yeah. The only advice that I would lay on top of that, which is what I tell my students, is it's okay if you can't hear that small voice right
indeed.
now.
Yes,
and
indeed.
Give yourself some grace. If you get through this whole project with my personal planning guidebook and you can't define your personal purpose, that's all right. Allow yourself that grace, but don't give up, and keep looking for those quiet places. And I love how you put it, that small little squeak of a voice that lives inside all of us.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Andy. I completely agree with you. A lot of people, I tell people too, don't cut yourself some slack. If you don't know it just yet, it's okay. Yeah. I didn't know it for the longest time either.
Right. It was in my early 40s before it really, really started to sink in. But at least before we jump to a quick break, let's talk about the risks of not defining personal purpose. What kind of trouble can we get ourselves into if we're not intentional about defining and living our purpose? Will we all run out and get a PhD?
I sure hope not. There are a lot of risks. One, the first thing that I would say is you run the risk of living what we call in logotherapy. So one of my master's degrees is in logophilosophy. So logotherapy, logo is Greek for meaning, and of course therapy, healing through meaning. One of the biggest risks is that you fall into what we call an existential vacuum, which is that void of meaning, that whole area where you feel empty inside. And that's what I hear a lot when I'm in front of audiences. People know that there's something more. They want something more, but they don't know what it is. So that's the first thing. And when we fall into that void, lots of really bad things can happen. We can start to fall victim to depression, which is a killer, right? It's akin, according to the Attorney General, of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's how dangerous depression and loneliness really are today.
Right. So
that's one thing. And then certainly we look for other ways to fill that void. And that might be excess alcohol use, drugs, other kinds of behaviors that are just way more risky than they need to be. And the other thing that happens is we can't hear our own voice. We're more likely to listen to and take the advice of others who maybe either don't understand us very well, don't clearly have good intentions for us, but really don't know what's best for us. So now we're in empty jobs that don't fulfill us. Maybe we've chosen relationships that aren't good for us. So that purpose gives that strong orientation to help us opt in to what's good and right for our path and aligns with that. And when we don't have that, it's kind of like being without, that North Star. So there's lots of things that can happen when we're not really anchored in our purpose.
Well, thank you for that, Alise. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back to talk about personal purpose, corporate purpose, and workplace culture. Hey, it's Andy here. I've got a new podcast I'd like to introduce you to, The Saturday Morning Muse. Start your weekend with me by exploring topics that span leadership, business management, education, and other musings that are designed to support your journey of personal and professional continuous improvement. Subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform. And we're back with Dr. Alise Cortez talking about personal purpose, corporate purpose, and now workplace culture. Let's start the second half of the show with culture. What does organizational culture mean to you? And when you're talking to clients, how do you help them define what culture means to them?
Such a great question. And I can't help but apply the lens that I learned, Andy, from my research around meaning and work and identity. So when I was researching identity, what I discovered is by interviewing 115 people the second time around, I discovered that when people talked about their identity, they were using things like they would talk about their personality, their traits and characteristics. They would talk about their skills, their talents, their values, their behavioral tendencies, their goals. And what I really have come to understand about organizational culture is it's an expression of the entity's identity, which includes all those different flavors. And so it's really oftentimes the unwritten ways and rules that people know how to behave, to communicate, and get rewarded. And so the opportunity, of course, is trying to make that much more intentional. Where organizations start to go awry is they're not aware of what their culture is. So they're not aware of how they are encouraging people to behave or misbehave, communicate or not communicate, or even how they're rewarding really poor behaviors.
Yeah, I love that I heard reward twice in your description, because a lot of leaders, they have great intentions, and I really want to create this an awesome corporate culture where everybody can thrive. We have trust balanced with accountability, but they scratch their heads about the lack of progress. And one of the things that almost always gets in the way is if your incentive system is not aligned with where you want your corporate culture to go, right, you are going to make no headway, because people will resort back to how they are being rewarded as the primary driver in the world of work.
Yes, financially, in terms of performance feedback, kudos, etc. Yes.
Yep. So let's continue our talk about corporate purpose. Now I'm going to put an old school directive, let's just get the work done leader who's skeptical about investing in the hard work that's needed to define the purpose and really the strategic direction of their business. What do you do to help them shift their mindset? And why is developing a clear answer to the why does this business exist question so important for really any business?
Yeah, so I would add one other thing to that set of query there. When I talk and work with organizations, the questions that I pose to them are, why does your organization exist and why should anyone care?
Yes.
Right. And so first I would say in today's times, and that's part of the reason I wrote The Great Revitalization, was to help leaders understand just what's the state of today's workforce. What do they want and need in order to give their best to you and stay with you? And a lot of that has changed radically since the pandemic, et cetera. So that's why I wrote the book. So first I would say is that if you look at the generational makeup of today's workforce, by 2030, it's estimated that the majority will be the youngest, the Zs, and then the Y, also known as millennial. And those two generations combined together insist on meaningful work and being part of an organization that does have a greater purpose beyond making profits. We're not saying we don't want to make profits. Profits are essential. And why those are kind of like a side benefit that comes from really living your purpose well. So first, if you want a workforce to be with you, I highly recommend that you get on the purpose train. That's the first thing. Secondly, then when you look at the consumers today, they are increasingly discerning. They are voting with their pocketbooks, and they vote according to what an organization stands for and how they're known to treat their employees, et cetera. So, if you are one of those organizations that just really doesn't have really, you're not really standing in anything, there's too many other choices for them to go to. So you don't really distinguish yourself there in the consumers. And then there's also the investor community, Andy. You know this. More and more investors are looking for purpose-led organizations because they generally outperform their peers.
Right.
And I've seen anywhere from a factor of 6 to 1 to 15 to 1.
Right.
And so there's lots of really great reasons to get on this purpose train. It's hard work. I've just recently done this exercise with a small digital transformation company of 25 people. And it was, to detect it and to articulate it is really something. That's why I call it wild alive scratching. We do it together, and it's so worth it.
Yeah, it is really hard work, and there are still many leaders out there that push back. And why do we have to go sit in a room with bad coffee for 3 days and figure out these questions? Why do I exist? Why do we exist? Where are we going? Why should anyone care? And getting that language right, and then having actions follow up. Because if the actions don't match the words, then you'll dig yourself an even deeper hole.
Yeah.
So let's get to the how. You have that same skeptical old school leader in front of you right now. What's your message to them on how to get started on the journey to a healthier, more engaged workforce? What's your process?
Happy to share that. And before I do that, I will say this, Andy, it's probably easier to get the attention of any of these old school leaders when they start to recognize where they might be losing market share. Maybe their customers aren't as happy anymore. They're going, or they're not buying as much, or they're starting to lose customers, or their customers are complaining about their service, or they're not innovating like their competitors are. Those are all things that usually get more of the attention to why a leader might want to pay attention to this culture weird stuff. But my process is, when I go into organizations, the first thing that I tend to do is with the team, depending on how big the company is we will interview. If it's a small enough company, we will interview all of them. If it's a bigger company, then we will interview a portion or a segment of them, and we'll ask them, what's the purpose of the organization, what's the mission, vision, values, what's great about this organization, what needs to be addressed, those kinds of existential kinds of questions. We can also do the survey work to get that. But then from there, once we get that initial voice, which is where you get a lot of people throwing a lot of weird stuff off, or they'll say things like, just a sec, let me go look at the plaque on the wall. I'll get you the answer in just a second. No. If it doesn't live in you, if you can't generate it, right, you don't really know it. And so once we get all of that jumble of responses, then what we'll do is we then start to go through like a qualitative analysis of what's in those responses to start to put together some themes that we hear people are using to describe the purpose, mission, vision, values. And then we bring the team together, or some semblance of the team if it's too big, and we work together and say, here's what we heard you say is the purpose of this organization. Now together, let's refine it. Wild and live scratch. What is it? And of course, we always want to enroll if there's a founder in this organization or an early vision that this organization came to be. Now that can change and evolve, but we do want to be able to take into account the original essence of the organization, or what it was intended to stand for. Is that still who we want to be and are in the world? I mean, there are organizations that are 160 years old that have definitely, re-evolved over those years fantastically. So once we do that together, then we come back as a team and say, okay, they gave us these other statements to refine their purpose, mission, vision, values. Then we come back and say, here's where another refined method. Sometimes it takes 3, 4, 5 iterations to get to the essence of those things. But that's how we do it at Gusto now.
Yeah. Well, Alise, as we wrap things up, let's have a little fun. I have two lightning round questions for you. Number one, I give you access to a rudimentary time machine. You can send a message to an earlier version of Alise Cortez. What's the message and what previous version of yourself do you send it to?
I think I would have that message sent to my 18-year-old self, who somehow immediately after I graduated high school had an uncanny way of finding the hard way to do everything. I would tell her maybe to seek wise counsel, to be a bit more proactive in how she sought looking for answers to her questions or looking for opportunities to solve her problems versus just simply just going it on her own.
That's great. We're all works in progress. What are you focused on right now in your personal journey of growth?
Oh, that's such a great question. I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Amor Nuberance. He challenged me to look into Dr. David Hawkins' work. He has a 9-part book series called Power versus Force. And each of those books are about 400 pages. So I've taken it upon myself. I'm going to read each one of those books. I will do my usual annotation of what I do to research what I get out of that. But I put a post on LinkedIn saying I was going to do this. And a few other people chimed in and said, yep, just bought the books myself. I'm in with you. So it's a pretty intense dive, but that's what I'm doing.
Excellent. Excellent. Alise, where can folks learn more about you and Gusto Now?
Easy to find me online. You can go to my personal website, alisecortez.com. That will help you find my email address, my phone number. Gusto Now, of course, is just gusto-now.com. There's a dash between those two words. And then LinkedIn is really easy to find me too.
Excellent. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation about defining personal purpose, corporate leaders defining corporate purpose. And now, get out there and align your purpose with the purpose of the organization that you work for, and magic will really start to happen for you. So, Alise, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Andy.
My name is Andy Tempty. This is the Balancing Act podcast. Please like, subscribe, rate, and most importantly, share this public good with your friends. This show is produced by Nicholas Tempty. You can find us on all the major streaming services as well as YouTube. See you next time on The Balancing Act.